Grant threw the divorce papers at my face, convinced he was discarding a penniless orphan to make room for his mistress. He declared I would leave with $0, but he made a fatal error. He never investigated the last name I abandoned. He had no clue that the man on every business magazine cover, the King Midas of Silicon Valley, was actually my long-lost brother. My name is Mallory Vance. At 34 years old, I spent my days organizing the quiet chaos of the Seattle Public Library, finding comfort in the scent of old paper and the hushed reverence of the stacks. My husband, Grant Sterling, who was 39, spent his days conquering the city skyline as a director of commercial real estate. We lived in a world of glass and steel, specifically a penthouse in Belltown that offered a panoramic view of the Sound. I had spent 5 years curating every inch of that space, selecting the grayish velvet sofas and the abstract art that Grant insisted would impress his clients. Yet, despite my touch on every cushion, I never felt like the lady of the house. I felt like a tenant who had overstayed her welcome, residing there solely at the mercy of Grant's bank account and his fluctuating moods. The air between us had been thinning for months. It started with the essential business trips to Chicago that extended from 3 days to 10. Then came the sudden privacy screens on his devices and the new passcodes I was not privy to. He began to look at my cardigans and sensible flats with a sneer, asking why I could not dress more like the wives of his partners. I brushed it off as stress. I told myself he was working hard for us. I was wrong. It was our 7th wedding anniversary. I had prepared a roast, the scent of rosemary fighting a losing battle against the sterile chill of the apartment. Grant walked in, not with a bouquet of peonies or a jewelry box, but with a thick manila envelope. He tossed it onto the Calcutta marble dining table. The sound it made was heavy, final. "Happy anniversary," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. My hands trembled as I slid the contents out. It was a petition for dissolution of marriage, a unilateral divorce filing. I scanned the legal jargon until my eyes snagged on the numbers. Spousal support $0. Asset division 0. I had exactly 30 days to vacate the premises. "Grant, what is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He poured himself a scotch, not bothering to offer me a glass. "It is an eviction notice. Mallory, let's not make this difficult. But why 7 years? Grant, we built this life." He laughed, a sharp, barking sound. "I built this life. You just occupied space. You are an orphan. Mallory, you came from nothing. And, frankly, you never really learned how to leave that behind. I need someone who fits my future, someone worthy of the empire I am building, not a librarian who thinks a coupon is a victory." The cruelty was so precise it almost felt surgical. I sat there, the shock freezing the tears in my ducts. I did not cry. I did not beg. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized the man I loved had died a long time ago, or perhaps he never existed. This ambush had been calculated. He had waited until the market turned, until his bonuses were secured in places he thought I could not touch. "You're throwing me out on the street," I asked. "I am correcting a mistake." He sneered. He pulled out his phone, tapping the screen with aggressive purpose. "And just so you don't get any ideas about dragging this out or hiring some ambulance chaser, look at your phone." My phone buzzed on the table. Notification after notification. Credit limit reached. Account frozen. Access denied. "I just canceled the supplementary cards," Grant said, taking a sip of his drink. "You have no access to my accounts. You have no savings because you spent it all on, what was it? Books and charity? You are done. Mallory." I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor. I walked past him to the bedroom. I did not take the designer dresses he had bought me to parade around at galas. I pulled down my 2 battered suitcases from the top shelf of the closet, the ones I had owned since college. I packed my jeans, my sweaters, my books, and the few photographs that belonged only to me. 10 minutes later, I was at the door, outside, The Seattle rain was coming down in sheets, hammering against the glass walls of the penthouse. "Go ahead," Grant called out from the living room, not even turning around to watch me leave. "Walk out. You'll see. You are nothing, absolutely nothing, without me." I closed the heavy door behind me, the click of the lock echoing like a gunshot in the silent hallway. I was alone, penniless, and homeless. But as I walked toward the elevator, I tightened my grip on the handle of my suitcase. He was wrong about one thing. He thought he knew exactly who I was, but he had never bothered to ask about the family I lost, or the brother who was currently reshaping the global economy. I found a studio apartment in Burien, miles away from the gleaming towers of downtown Seattle. It smelled of stale cigarette smoke and damp carpet, a stark contrast to the lavender-scented air of the penthouse. But as I sat on the lumpy mattress, I realized I could breathe for the first time in years. I was poor again, scraping by on the cash I had hidden in a hollowed-out book. But I was free from Grant's suffocating control. I stared at the peeling paint on the ceiling and let my mind drift back to the beginning. Before I was Mallory Vance, the librarian. Back then, I was Mallory Thorne. The state of Washington separated me from my brother, Declan, when I was 8 and he was 12, right after the car accident that took our parents. We bounced through the foster care system, lost in a labyrinth of caseworkers and temporary homes until we lost track of each other entirely. I changed my last name to Vance when I turned 18, a desperate attempt to sever ties with a past that hurt too much to remember. I thought I was alone in the world. I was wrong. 2 years ago, I saw a face on the cover of Forbes that made my heart stop. It was older, sharper, and hardened by the world, but I knew those eyes. Declan Thorne. He was not just surviving. He was the CEO of Nexos Global, a logistics empire that moved half the world's cargo. He was the self-made billionaire of the decade. We had reconnected in secret, meeting in parked cars and quiet diners. I never told Grant. Part of me wanted to protect Declan from people who would use him, but a darker part of me wanted to test Grant. I wanted to know if my husband loved me, the orphan with nothing, or if he would only love the sister of a tycoon. Grant failed that test spectacularly. I pulled my burner phone from my pocket. My hands shook as I dialed the number I had memorized but rarely used. It rang once. Mallory. His voice was deep, steady, a rock in the storm. Declan. My voice cracked. The dam finally breaking. He did it. He threw me out. I told him everything. The divorce papers, the frozen accounts, the cruelty, the mistress. I waited for pity, for the soft cooing sounds people make when they hear a sad story. Instead, the silence on the other end was terrifying. It was the silence of a predator spotting prey. "He said you have no one," Declan asked, his tone dropping to a sub-zero chill. "He thinks you are alone." "Yes," I sobbed. "He said I am nothing without him." "Pack a bag for tonight. Leave the rest. I am sending a car. My team is already in the air. We will be in Seattle in 4 hours." By midnight, I was sitting in the presidential suite of the Four Seasons. The room was larger than my entire new apartment. Declan stood by the window, looking out at the rain-slicked city. He looked expensive, dangerous, and utterly furious. He turned to me, his jaw set in a hard line. "I will bury him." "Mallory," Declan said, pacing the room. "I will buy his company and dismantle it brick by brick. I will make sure he never works in this country again. I want to announce who you are tomorrow morning. Let the world know Grant Sterling just evicted the sister of Declan Thorne." He reached for his phone to call his PR team, but I reached out and covered his hand. "No," I said, my voice steadying. "Not yet. Why he humiliated you? Exactly. And if you save me now, he will just be the victim of a billionaire's wrath. He will spin it. He will say he didn't know." I looked at my brother, feeling a cold resolve hardening in my chest, replacing the grief. I want him to lose because of his own arrogance, I want to beat him in court, playing by his rules, while he thinks I am weak. I want to see the look on his face when he realizes he dug his own grave. Declan studied me for a long moment. Then a slow, terrifying grin spread across his face. A fair fight, until it isn't. He wants a war, I whispered. Let's give him one. The team Declan assembled operated in the shadows, moving with a silent efficiency that was terrifying to behold. While I sat in my cramped studio apartment eating instant noodles, 3 forensic accountants and 2 private investigators were dissecting the last decade of Grant's life. They did not just look at bank statements. They peeled back the layers of his existence like surgeons cutting through skin to find the rot beneath. It took them less than 48 hours to put a name and a face to the worthy woman Grant had replaced me with, Sienna Cross. She was 23 years old, the daughter of a minor investor Grant had courted for years. Her social media presence was a loud, tacky shrine to consumerism. I scrolled through her feed, my stomach churning as I realized the timeline. She had been posting photos from vacations for 18 months. Look at this, the lead investigator said, sliding a tablet across the table during our briefing at the hotel. He got sloppy. I looked at the screen. Grant had purchased a luxury waterfront villa in Lake Tahoe 3 months ago. The deed was held by a shell company called Sterling Ventures, but the money trail led straight back to a withdrawal from our joint investment account funds he claimed had been lost in a bad market turn. He had stolen money from our marriage to build a nest for his mistress. Furthermore, the accountants found a series of transfers totaling $1.5 million into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. He had been bleeding our assets dry to ensure I would walk away with nothing but the clothes on my back. Then I saw the detail that made my blood run cold. In a photo from 2 weeks ago, Sienna was wearing a vintage diamond necklace. That, I pointed at the screen, my finger trembling. That is my grandmother's necklace. Grant had told me it was stolen during a break-in last year. He had even filed a police report and collected $50,000 in insurance money. He had looked me in the eye, held me while I cried over the loss of my only family heirloom, and all the while it was sitting in his pocket, waiting for Sienna's neck. "We have him on insurance fraud," Declan said from the corner of the room, his voice low and dangerous. "That alone is prison time." "Not yet," I said. "I need him to feel safe." I opened my laptop and composed an email to Grant. I stripped away my pride, channeling the desperate, broken woman he thought I was. "Grant, please." I typed, forcing myself to use the words of a victim. "The deposit for the apartment took everything. I can't make rent next month. Can you please release just a little from the joint account? I am begging you." His reply came within 6 minutes. It was short, cruel, and perfect for my evidence folder. "Stop whining. Mallory, you are an adult. Figure it out. I am currently looking at vacation properties in Cabo with Sienna, so I do not have time for your poverty. Maybe you should sell those old books you love so much." He was so confident. He was bragging about spending money he legally should not have access to while denying his wife basic support, while I played the part of the destitute ex-wife. Declan's corporate team at Nexos Global uncovered the final nail for Grant's coffin. Grant's company, Apex Realty, was not the powerhouse he pretended it was. He had leveraged the company to the hilt to fund his lifestyle and was currently desperate to close a merger to hide a massive deficit. "He is trying to merge with Orion Logistics," Declan said, tossing a dossier onto the table. "He thinks it will save him." I looked at the file, then up at my brother. "Orion Logistics, a subsidiary I acquired 6 months ago," Declan said, a dark smile playing on his lips. "He has been sending desperate emails to the CEO of Orion for weeks, begging for a meeting. He has no idea that the man he is trying to impress answers directly to me. So his financial survival depends on you." I realized. "It depends on us," Declan corrected. "He is walking into a trap, Mallory, and he is running to get there." Declan did not just hire a lawyer, he weaponized one. Evelyn Pike was a legend in the legal world, known in whispered circles as the Cobra for her ability to strike fast and lethally. However, when she took my case, she did so under the guise of a legal aid for the indigent program. To Grant, she was just an overworked public defender trying to help a charity case. We sat in her office, drafting the countersuit. Evelyn was brilliant. She purposely phrased our demands for a 50-50 asset split and damages for adultery in a way that sounded desperate and legally shaky. She used emotional language rather than cold legal precedents, painting me as a weeping victim rather than a formidable opponent. "We want him to laugh," Evelyn said, smoothing her skirt. "If he thinks you are weak, he will not shield his neck." Grant did exactly that. My old phone, which I had kept active, received a text from him. Cute attempt with the legal aid. "Mal, my lawyers are using your countersuit as a coaster. Save yourself the embarrassment and sign the waiver." He was so confident that he decided to host an engagement party with Sienna that very weekend at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. It was a public declaration of his new life, held mere weeks after kicking me out. I was not invited, obviously, but Evelyn needed a signature on a specific document delivered to his counsel, who was attending the party. I volunteered to take it. I needed to see him one last time before the end. I walked into the lobby wearing my worn-out trench coat and rain boots. The ballroom doors were open, spilling light and music into the hallway. Sienna was there, holding a glass of champagne, surrounded by a gaggle of women in glittering dresses. She spotted me immediately. "Oh my God!" Sienna shrieked, drawing the attention of half the room. "Is that the ex? Did you come to clean the floors?" Her friends giggled. I kept my head high, handing the envelope to the concierge for Grant's lawyer. But then Grant stepped out, laughing at something an older man was saying. That man was Sienna's father. My breath hitched in my throat. On the older man's wrist sat the Patek Philippe watch. I had saved for 3 years, eating ramen and skipping lunches, to buy that watch for Grant's 30th birthday. He had told me he kept it in a safe because it was too precious to wear. Now, he had re-gifted my sacrifice to buy his way into a new family. "Get out of here, Mallory," Grant hissed when he saw me, his face twisting in disgust. "You are ruining the aesthetic." I turned and walked away, my nails digging into my palms until they bled. I did not scream. I did not make a scene. I just walked, blocks away, inside a black SUV with tinted windows. Declan watched the live feed from the hotel security cameras he had hacked. His face was a mask of cold fury. He pressed a button on the intercom to his executive assistant back in New York. "Pull the plug on the financing," Declan said. "Contact every bank in the syndicate. Freeze Apex Realty's loan applications immediately. Flag them for high-risk compliance review." The next morning, the cracks began to show. Grant's company was hit with sudden bureaucratic delays on 3 major loans he needed to keep his operations afloat. I heard about it through the monitors Declan's team had set up. Grant was shouting at his CFO over the phone, blaming the banks, blaming the economy, blaming bad luck. "It is just a glitch," Grant yelled. "Fix it. I have a wedding to pay for." He never once suspected that the homeless librarian he had mocked the night before was the architect of his misery. He was too busy being the master of the universe. When the court date for the preliminary hearing was set, Grant told his lawyer not to worry about prep work. "It will be over in 15 minutes, he bragged. "She will take the $5,000 and crawl back to whatever hole she came from." He had no idea that he was walking into a slaughterhouse. The morning of the mediation hearing, the courthouse hallway smelled of floor wax and anxiety. Grant arrived as if he were attending a red carpet premiere rather than a divorce negotiation. He was flanked by 3 lawyers in sharp navy suits, a phalanx of legal intimidation designed to make me feel small. Clinging to his arm was Sienna, dressed in a white suit that looked suspiciously bridal. She was not allowed inside the mediation room, of course, but her presence was a calculated insult. As I sat on the hard wooden bench waiting for the doors to open, She caught my eye, smirked, and audibly whispered to Grant, "Don't be too hard on her. Baby, she needs lunch money." Grant laughed, a sound that used to make me smile but now made my skin crawl. He didn't even look at me as he swept into the room. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. We sat on opposite sides of a long oak table. Grant sat with his legs crossed, checking his watch, clearly bored. His lead attorney, a man with a smile like a shark, slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward Evelyn Pike. "We are prepared to offer a settlement of $5,000, the lawyer said, his tone oozing false generosity. "Mr. Sterling acknowledges that Ms. Vance has no skills or assets, so consider this a gesture of goodwill to help her get back on her feet. Take it, sign the waiver, and we can all go home." $5,000. It was less than what he spent on a single weekend golf trip. It was an insult wrapped in a check. Evelyn Pike did not pick up the paper. She didn't even look at it. She folded her hands on the table, her expression serene and terrifyingly calm. "We decline," Evelyn said softly. "Furthermore, my client is formally requesting a full forensic audit of Mr. Sterling's personal and business finances, dating back 5 years. The room went dead silent. Grant stopped checking his watch. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Excuse me?" Grant sputtered. "You heard me?" Evelyn continued, her voice hardening. "We have reason to believe that marital assets have been diverted into shell companies and offshore accounts. We are not settling for $5,000. We are settling for 50% of everything." Grant slammed his hand on the table, making the water pitcher jump. "This is insane," he shouted, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "She is just a gold digger. She contributed nothing to my success, nothing you have no right to audit me. My finances are complex corporate structures, not a piggy bank for some bitter housewife to rummage through the mediator." A retired judge with patience worn thin by men like Grant looked over his spectacles. "Mr. Sterling, lower your voice." "I will not," Grant yelled, standing up. "She is trying to blackmail me." Evelyn calmly opened her folder and slid a single document toward the mediator. It was the deed to the Lake Tahoe villa, purchased by Sterling Ventures with funds traced directly from our joint savings. "We have preliminary evidence of fraud, Your Honor," Evelyn said. The mediator scanned the document, his eyebrows raising slightly. He looked at Grant, then back at the paper. "The request for a forensic audit is granted. Mr. Sterling, you are ordered to open your books within 48 hours. Grant sank back into his chair. He looked pale. I knew what he was thinking. He was terrified, but he was also arrogant. He believed his web of lies was too intricate for a public defender and a librarian to unravel. He was convincing himself that he had hidden the money deep enough. As the meeting adjourned, I stood up. Grant was stuffing papers into his briefcase with aggressive, jerky movements. He looked up, his eyes filled with pure venom. "You will regret this. Mallory," he hissed, "you are going to burn every bridge you have left." I looked him straight in the eye, something I hadn't done in years without flinching. "Grant," I said, my voice steady and quiet, "you should be less worried about $5,000 and more worried about keeping your CEO chair." He froze for a second, then let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "You are delusional. Poverty has made you crazy." "We will see," I replied. The trial was set for 2 weeks later. As Grant stormed out of the room to comfort Sienna, I knew exactly what he was going to do. He was cornered. He needed cash to fill the holes the audit would uncover. He needed a miracle. And in his mind, that miracle was the merger with Orion Logistics. He was going to rush the deal, pushing for a signature to get the influx of capital he desperately needed. He had no idea he was running straight into the open jaws of the wolf. The week leading up to the trial was a blur of frantic energy for Grant and a period of quiet, predatory, waiting for me. He was betting everything on the merger between Apex Realty and Orion Logistics. It was his lifeboat, the only thing that could infuse enough cash into his company to hide the massive holes the forensic audit was about to expose. Desperate to impress the executives at Orion, Grant drained the last of his liquidity and took out high-interest short-term loans to fund a signing ceremony that rivaled a presidential inauguration. He rented the ballroom at the Four Seasons, ordered vintage champagne that cost $300 a bottle, and filled the room with imported orchids. He needed to look successful to be successful. I watched the disaster unfold from my small apartment, glued to the live updates Declan sent to my tablet. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the ballroom was packed with Seattle's business elite, all drinking Grant's expensive wine. Grant stood at the podium, beaming, sweating slightly under the lights, waiting for the CEO of Orion Logistics to walk through the doors. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Finally, the doors opened, but it was not the CEO. It was a young, sharp-faced personal assistant carrying a briefcase. Grant's smile faltered. "Where is Mr. Henderson?" The assistant walked to the microphone, her voice amplified through the silent room. "Mr. Sterling, Orion Logistics has decided to suspend negotiations indefinitely. We have received concerning reports regarding the ethical conduct of Apex Realty's leadership. We do not do business with compromised partners." The silence that followed was absolute, shattered only by the sound of glass breaking as Grant dropped his champagne flute. By the time the markets closed that afternoon, Apex Realty's stock had plummeted 40%. Investors were pulling out in droves. Grant was frantically calling everyone he knew, screaming at his staff, trying to stop the bleeding, but the wound was fatal. The ripples reached his personal life immediately. Declan sent me a video file from a security camera inside a high-end boutique in downtown Seattle. Sienna was at the counter, trying to buy a designer handbag. She tapped her card. The clerk shook his head. She tapped it again. "I am sorry, miss," the clerk said. "It is declined. Do you have another form of payment?" Sienna stormed out of the store, furiously dialing Grant. I could imagine the conversation. The facade was crumbling, while Grant's world was burning. Declan came to my apartment that evening with a folder tucked under his arm. He looked pleased, like a cat that had just caught a particularly slow mouse. "I have a gift for you," Declan said, tossing the folder onto my coffee table. "For the trial." I opened it. Inside was a deposition from a man named Arthur Penhaligon. "Who is this?" I asked. "Grant's former accountant." Declan replied, "Grant fired him 2 years ago for raising concerns about the offshore transfers and threatened to ruin his career if he spoke up. My team found him working at a tax prep chain in a strip mall. He is very eager to testify." This was it, the smoking gun. With Arthur's testimony, Grant wasn't just losing a divorce case, he was looking at federal charges. My phone rang late that night. The screen flashed, "Grant." I stared at it for a moment before answering. "What do you want?" "Grant." "You need to stop this," he screamed, his voice ragged and hysterical. "Do you hear me? You are destroying the company. If Apex goes under, there is no money. You get nothing. Zero. You are cutting off your nose to spite your face." He sounded like a cornered animal, lashing out with everything he had left. He still thought he could manipulate me with fear. He still thought I cared about the money more than the truth. "Are you done?" I asked calmly. "Mallory, listen to me. Drop the lawsuit." His voice cracked, shifting from anger to desperate bargaining. "Drop it, and I will. I will give you $50,000, cash. Just stop the audit." I hung up. I didn't want his words to linger in my ear. I opened my messaging app and typed a single response, knowing it would haunt him for the rest of the night. "See you in court. And remember to wear your best suit." The night before the trial, the air in Seattle felt heavy, charged with the electricity of an approaching storm. Inside the penthouse I used to call home, The atmosphere was even more volatile. According to the updates from Declan's surveillance team, Grant and Sienna were screaming at each other until 3 in the morning. Sienna was furious because her black card had been declined at a spa, and Grant was furious because she lacked the vision to see past their temporary cash flow problem. Despite the crumbling stock price of Apex Realty and the looming audit, Grant remained paralyzed by his own arrogance. He was convinced that he would walk into that courtroom, discredit me, and walk out with a clean slate to rebuild his empire. He truly believed he was the protagonist of this story. To ensure his victory, Grant had expanded his legal team. He hired a specialist in character assassination, a lawyer known for digging up dirt where there was none. Their strategy was transparent. They intended to paint me as mentally unstable, a hysterical woman prone to delusions, or perhaps even invent an imaginary affair to justify Grant's own infidelity. They wanted to destroy my reputation so thoroughly that no judge would believe a word I said. While Grant plotted my destruction, my brother landed at King County International Airport on his private jet. He did not come alone. He brought the general counsel of Nexos Global and a team of litigators who usually handled billion-dollar mergers, not domestic disputes. I met them at Declan's hotel suite, my hands trembling as I held a cup of chamomile tea. The reality of facing Grant, of seeing the man who had discarded me like trash, was suddenly terrifying. "I don't know if I can do this," I whispered, staring at the steam rising from my cup. He knows exactly how to get inside my head. He knows all my weak spots. Declan walked over and knelt beside my chair. He took the cup from my hands and held them firmly in his own. "Look at me, Mal," he said, his voice fierce and protective. "You are scared of the husband who bullied a librarian. But that is not who walks into that courtroom tomorrow. Tomorrow, you are not the lonely Mallory Vance. You are Mallory Thorne. You have the blood of survivors in your veins, and you have an army behind you." I took a deep breath, drawing strength from his grip. "Mallory Thorne," I repeated, testing the weight of the name on my tongue. It felt like armor. The next morning, the steps of the courthouse looked less like a legal institution and more like a Hollywood premiere. A swarm of reporters and camera crews jostled for position behind the police barricades. Declan's PR team had anonymously tipped off every major news outlet in the city that the trial of the year was about to unfold, though they omitted the specific details of why. Grant arrived in a leased Mercedes, stepping out with a practiced solemnity. When he saw the cameras, his chest puffed out. He assumed the media frenzy was due to the dramatic collapse of Apex Realty. He stopped briefly, putting on a brave face, clearly intending to play the role of the victimized CEO harassed by a vindictive ex-wife. He had no idea the cameras were there to witness his execution. I arrived 10 minutes later in a beat-up Uber. I wore a simple gray suit and sensible heels, keeping my head down as I navigated the crowd. I was the invisible woman, just as Grant liked me. Inside the courtroom, the air was stale and cold. Grant was already seated at the defense table, whispering to his lead attorney. When I walked past the bar to take my seat beside Evelyn Pike, Grant looked up, his eyes raked over my outfit, his lip curling in a familiar sneer. "You really think you have a chance here?" he hissed, leaning across the aisle so only I could hear. "Look at you. You look pathetic. Who is paying for that geriatric lawyer? You are going to be paying my legal fees for the rest of your life." I didn't answer. I just sat down and smoothed my skirt. "All rise," the bailiff announced. The Honorable Judge Harrison swept into the room, his black robes billowing. He looked irritated, likely briefed on the media circus outside. He sat down and glared at both tables over his spectacles. "Be seated," the judge commanded. "We are here for the matter of Sterling versus Sterling, opening statements." Grant's lawyer stood up immediately, buttoning his jacket with a flourish. He walked to the center of the room, exuding the confidence of a man who thought he had already won. "Your Honor," he began, his voice booming. "This case is a simple matter of extortion. We have here a bitter woman, unwilling to accept that her marriage has ended, who is now attempting to use the legal system to rob a hard-working businessman of his life's work. We intend to prove that the plaintiff has contributed nothing to the marital estate and is driven solely by greed and malice." Grant nodded along, a smug smile plastered on his face. He was enjoying the show. He did not know it was the last time he would smile for a very long time. Grant's attorney, a man whose hourly rate could feed a family for a month, pointed a manicured finger at me from across the aisle. He painted a portrait of me that was unrecognizable. According to him, I was a leech, a woman who sat on the couch eating bonbons while her brilliant husband built an empire from scratch. He called me a financial drain, a person with no ambition who was now trying to extort a successful entrepreneur. Ms. Vance brought nothing to this marriage. The lawyer sneered, looking directly at the jury box, even though there was no jury, just the judge. And now she demands half of a fortune she did not earn. It is classic predation. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but Evelyn Pike placed a calming hand on my arm. She did not object. She did not shout. She waited until he was finished, until the echo of his insults had faded into the high ceilings of the courtroom. Then she stood up. "Your Honor," Evelyn said, her voice crisp and clear. "We do not wish to waste the court's time with emotional arguments. We prefer to speak in numbers." She lifted a heavy binder from our table. It landed on the judge's bench with a dull, heavy thud that sounded like a gavel. "This binder contains bank records dating back 3 years. Evelyn continued. "It details monthly transfers from the joint marital account to an individual named Sienna Cross. It includes receipts for a villa in Lake Tahoe, purchased through a shell company, and credit card statements for jewelry that Mr. Sterling claimed was stolen for insurance purposes. The total amount diverted from the marital estate is approximately $1.5 million. Grant's face went pale. He leaned over to his lawyer, whispering frantically. When the judge looked at him, Grant stood up, ignoring his counsel's restraining hand. "That is absurd," Grant stammered. Those were business expenses. Consulting fees. Sienna is a marketing consultant." Evelyn didn't even look at him. "We call Mr. Arthur Penhaligon to the stand." Grant froze. The color drained from his face completely. He watched in horror as his former accountant, a man he had bullied into silence years ago, walked nervously to the witness stand. Arthur swore the oath and sat down, adjusting his glasses. "Mr. Penhaligon," Evelyn asked, "can you explain the nature of the payments to Ms. Cross?" "There were no consulting services," Arthur said, his voice shaking slightly but gaining strength. "Mr. Sterling instructed me to categorize them as external marketing to hide them from his wife. When I refused to continue cooking the books, he fired me and threatened to blacklist me from the industry." The judge turned his gaze toward Grant. It was a look of pure, unadulterated disdain. "Mr. Sterling, I am going to remind you that perjury is a felony offense. If you lie to this court again, I will have you in handcuffs before lunch." Grant slumped into his chair. He was sweating profusely now, the moisture beading on his forehead. His lawyer stood up, looking flustered. "Your Honor, we request a brief recess to confer with our client," the lawyer said. "5 minutes," the judge snapped. As the room broke into murmurs, Grant turned his head toward the gallery behind him. Sienna had snuck in, wearing oversized sunglasses in a futile attempt to be invisible. "You idiot," Grant hissed at her, his voice carrying across the quiet room. "Why are you here? Get out! You are ruining everything." Sienna shrank back, but before she could move, the bailiff called the room back to order. The recess was over before it began. Evelyn Pike remained standing. "Your Honor," Evelyn said, commanding the attention of the room, "before we proceed to closing arguments, I have one final witness. We wish to address the defense's characterization of my client as a financial burden and a nobody without connections. Grant rolled his eyes, wiping sweat from his upper lip. Oh, please. Who is she going to call another librarian? We call to the stand the financial guarantor for the plaintiff, Evelyn announced. Mr. Declan Thorne. The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a dramatic creak. Two large men in black suits stepped in first, efficiently clearing the path. A hush fell over the room, the kind of silence that usually precedes a natural disaster. Then Declan walked in. He was not wearing the casual tech billionaire hoodie. He was wearing a charcoal three-piece suit that was tailored to within an inch of its life, a suit that cost more than the Mercedes Grant had arrived in. His presence sucked the oxygen out of the room. He walked down the center aisle with the stride of a man who owned the building, the city, and perhaps the very air we were breathing. His eyes, cold and sharp as diamonds, locked onto Grant and did not let go. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, heavy enough to crush a man. Grant stared at the door, his mouth slightly open, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. He knew who walked in. Everyone did. It was like seeing a god walk among mortals. Declan Thorne stopped at the plaintiff's table, ignoring the stunned murmurs from the gallery, and placed a heavy, protective hand on my shoulder. The warmth of his grip anchored me, stopping the trembling in my knees. Evelyn Pike turned to the room, her voice ringing out like a bell tolling a funeral march. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to introduce Mr. Declan Thorne, CEO of Nexos Global. He is here today in his capacity as the biological brother of my client, Mrs. Mallory Vance Thorne. Grant looked as if he had been slapped, his face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. He gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. Brother Grant stammered, his voice thin and high. That is impossible. She is an orphan. She has no family. Declan slowly turned his head to look at Grant. The expression on my brother's face was terrifyingly blank, the look of a man who was about to step on an insect. We are orphans, Declan said, his voice deep and resonating off the wood paneling. That is true. But unlike you, Grant, we understand the value of family. You spent years belittling my sister, calling her a gold digger, calling her a nobody. You did not know that she has refused to touch a single cent of my fortune for years. She chose to live a simple life with you because she loved you. She turned down a share of a billion-dollar empire to clip coupons in your kitchen. A collective gasp went through the room. The reporters in the back row were frantically typing on their phones. The judge banged his gavel, demanding order, but the noise level was rising. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Sienna grab her purse. She stood up, trying to slide toward the exit, her heels clicking softly on the floor. A burly security guard from Declan's team simply stepped in front of the door, crossing his arms. She froze, trapped. Declan was not finished. He took a step toward the defense table, invading Grant's personal space. And, by the way, Declan added, a cruel smile finally touching his lips. That merger you are so desperate for. The one with Orion Logistics that you think will save your miserable company, Orion is a subsidiary of Nexos Global. I own it, and I personally killed the deal at 8 o'clock this morning when I confirmed that the CEO of Apex Realty was the man abusing my sister. Grant collapsed. He did not just sit down, his legs gave out. He slumped into his chair, staring at the table, his eyes unfocused. In that second, he saw the full scope of his annihilation. He had not just lost a wife. He had lost his company, his reputation, his future, and every dollar he had desperately tried to hide. I stood up. The room felt strangely quiet again, centered on the two of us. I looked down at the man I had wasted 7 years on. He was shaking, a fine tremor running through his expensive suit. "Grant," I said softly. He looked up, his eyes wet and terrified. "You told me to leave with nothing. You threw me out with 2 suitcases and $0. Look at us now. Grant, look who is truly leaving with empty hands." The judge did not wait for closing arguments. He looked at the mountain of evidence, the confessed perjury, and the broken man before him. Given the overwhelming evidence of fraud, perjury, and malicious intent, the judge declared, his voice booming, "I am issuing an immediate judgment. The prenuptial agreement is voided due to duress and fraud. I am awarding 100% of the marital assets to the plaintiff, Mrs. Vance. Furthermore, the defendant is ordered to pay all legal fees and punitive damages for emotional distress." The gavel came down. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The moment Grant stepped out of the courthouse doors, he did not find freedom. He found the Economic Crimes Unit waiting for him. The forensic audit Evelyn Pike had presented did more than just win my divorce case. It provided a roadmap of embezzlement and tax evasion for the federal government. I stood at the top of the stairs and watched as the officers approached him. "Grant Sterling, you are under arrest for wire fraud and tax evasion," the officer stated, spinning him around. Grant looked up at me, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Mallory, call Declan. Tell him to stop this." I just shook my head. He was still trying to use the people he had hurt to save himself. A few yards away, the press had swarmed Sienna. She saw the handcuffs on Grant and immediately turned on him. She looked straight into a television camera, tears streaming down her face with practiced perfection. "I am a victim here," Sienna cried out, her voice trembling. "He lied to me. I had no idea he was married or that the money was stolen. I am just a girl who fell for a monster." Her performance was Oscar-worthy, but the internet was unforgiving. By the next morning, the hashtag canceling her was trending worldwide. She lost her modeling contracts, her social media following evaporated, and she was left with a reputation so toxic that no one in Seattle would hire her. The dismantling of Grant's empire was swift and brutal. The court ordered the immediate seizure of his assets to satisfy the judgment. The penthouse in Belltown, the luxury cars he loved more than me, and even the diamond necklace he had gifted Sienna were repossessed and sold at auction. The proceeds, totaling over $3 million, were transferred to my account. I stared at the balance on my banking app, but I felt no desire to spend it on myself. I took every cent of the money Grant had stolen and founded the Vance Thorne Foundation. It was a scholarship fund dedicated specifically to children aging out of the foster care system, ensuring that kids who started life like Declan and I did would have the chance to go to college without drowning in debt. Grant is currently serving a 10-year sentence in a federal facility. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that he has no visitors. His family cut ties to avoid the scandal, and his fair-weather friends vanished the moment the money did. He sits in a cell, owing millions in back taxes, completely alone and truly penniless. The curse he tried to cast on me had rebounded on him with poetic precision. I did not return to the high society life my brother offered. Instead, I moved to a small, windy coastal town in Oregon. I bought a weathered cottage with a view of the gray ocean and opened a bookstore combined with a coffee shop, fulfilling a dream I had since I was a girl. The air here smells of salt and old paper, and it is the sweetest scent I have ever known. Declan respects my need for peace, though he cannot help being himself. He visits me once a month, piloting his helicopter to a landing field behind the local high school. The whole town buzzes with excitement whenever he arrives. But to me, he is just my big brother coming for coffee. One evening, I walked down to the water's edge as the sun dipped below the horizon. The wind whipped my hair around my face. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the gold wedding band I had kept for this specific moment. I held it up, watching the dying light catch the metal one last time. I was no longer Grant's wife. I was no longer the poor orphan or the billionaire's sister. I was just Mallory. I pulled my arm back and threw the ring as hard as I could. It arched through the air and vanished into the crashing waves with a tiny splash. I did not feel angry. I felt light. I turned my back on the ocean and walked toward the warm, yellow lights of my bookstore, ready to write the next chapter of my life. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please comment down below where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you all. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.